I'm not sure how I got here. Has to do with Spider-Man, I think.
What the hell are you talking about?
Welcome to ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn, and while the MCU has been struggling to reach the former glory of its Infinity Saga, there's actually another studio who's had an even more difficult time with its universe of Marvel characters. So we need to talk about what's going on with Sony's live-action Marvel universe, where it went wrong, and how they could have had an awesome live-action Marvel universe of their own without Spider-Man had they adapted one of the best Marvel comics ever written. And there are also some recent reports claiming that Sony and Marvel Studios are butting heads over what direction to take Spider-Man 4. Tom Holland and Kevin Feige want a more grounded and street-level story, while Sony is wanting to do another multiverse movie with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield.
I want them both.
Okay, so way back in the day when Marvel Comics was going bankrupt, they started licensing off the film rights to their biggest characters, and Sony Pictures ended up making arguably the best Spider-Man film ever made with Spider-Man 2. But after the failure of Spider-Man 3, they decided to reboot, and then they completely neutered that promising reboot by trying to catch up with the MCU. Just like the DCEU did with Batman v Superman, Sony used The Amazing Spider-Man 2 as a rushed attempt at creating a cinematic universe that completely derailed Andrew Garfield's time as the web-swinger. Sony botched that franchise so badly that they wound up canceling the entire thing and allowed Spider-Man to join the MCU with yet another reboot.
You're the Spiderling, crime-fighting spider. You're Spider-Boy?
Spider-Man.
So after Sony made the wise choice of allowing Spider-Man to join the MCU, a choice that delighted both fans and the box office, it wasn't too long before they started going down that same path as before, creating a shoehorned and unwanted cinematic universe of Spider-Man adjacent characters, only this time, it doesn't even have Spider-Man. So Sony's new plan seems to be to resurrect their failed Sinister Six idea and create their own version of the Avengers, the Suicide Squad, and the Guardians of the Galaxy all rolled into one. A team of villains turned into anti-heroes teaming up to go up against even greater threats. And on paper, that isn't a horrible idea, but the way they're executing it just is not working. So Sony's deal with Marvel Studios removes Spider-Man from the playing field by placing Peter Parker firmly in the MCU, and it's really a win-win for both studios. The MCU gets to have Marvel's most popular character as part of their Avengers movies, and Sony gets to have their Spider-Man movies be a part of arguably the most successful franchise of all time. And you know, Sony could have just let a good thing be. They could have let Marvel Studios do all the work and still raked in a lot of money. And Sony could have kept making their kick-ass animated Spider-Man films. And speaking of those Spider-Man films, be sure to check out our awesome Doug as Spider-Man pointing meme shared over on our merch store, ScreenCrushMerch.com, as well as lots of other great merch we've got up on the store right now, such as our Fraser B shirt celebrating Kelsey Grammer's return as the Big Blue Mutant, our Masked Flurkin shirt, and this awesome E.T. inspired shirt featuring Din and Grogu from The Mandalorian. I drew that one, you better buy it. Anyway, back to Sony. So after avoiding catastrophe and moving Spider-Man over to the MCU, Sony just had to continue their old plan of spin-off movies about Spider-Man villains teaming up. And look, I don't blame them for wanting to make more movies. Sony Pictures is a movie-making company after all, and their primary objective is to make money making movies. So, I mean, why not make other movies with their other Marvel IP that isn't Spider-Man? I'll tell you why. They apparently don't know how.
Until we've uncovered the
I could sit here and rehash how awful Morbius was, or how terrible Kraven looks. I could talk about the empty promises in their marketing, like the Spider-Man graffiti in the Morbius trailer. I could talk about their god-awful post-credit scenes, such as the one that teased a Spider-Man and Venom crossover, but instead just gave us this.
Tell me again about your purple alien that loves stones.
Or we could take a dive into this beauty.
Has to do with Spider-Man, I think.
I mean, that doesn't even make sense. Doctor Strange's Forget Peter Parker spell sent everyone back to their universe. Why would Vulture get sent to the Morbius universe?
Other person?
It's just another example of Sony having no freaking idea what they're doing with these characters and shining a spotlight on the fact that Spider-Man isn't there.
Other person?
I mean, really? I think it has something to do with Spider-Man? Which studio exec wrote that on their iPad 10 minutes before Michael Keaton came into the sound booth?
Other person?
What, Doug?
I thought you weren't gonna rehash all that.
You're right, my bad. Okay, so on a more positive note, Sony's first Spider-Man-less Spider-Man movie was actually pretty good. Audiences loved Tom Hardy's Venom, me included. It was funny, true to Venom's comic self, unlike Spider-Man 3, and it was all in all a great time at the movies. Venom worked, and Venom could have been the key to Sony having a successful Spider-Man adjacent franchise without Spider-Man. Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock in Venom could have filled the massive shoes of Peter Parker's Spider-Man, and they could have done a lot of awesome stories with his character at the center. In fact, I have a suggestion of which story from the comics could have made Sony some major box office bucks and got them in good graces with the fans. I'm talking about a big screen adaptation of Kraven's Last Hunt. In that comic, we see Kraven hunting down Spider-Man, and Spider-Man is even wearing the Black Venom suit. Sony could have easily reworked Kraven's Last Hunt to be a story about Kraven hunting Venom. So here's my pitch. After Venom, you do a movie called Kraven's First Hunt. It's of course an origin story for Kraven, but it's primarily about his first big hunt, a hunt for a vampire.
You didn't see that coming?
We get to see Kraven travel to like Transylvania or something where there are rumors of mass killings taking place in the night, a murderer leaving victims' bodies completely bloodless. Kraven then goes full Van Helsing with his big ass crossbow and starts hunting down this vampire. And that's when we meet Morbius. They have their big fight and both characters get their blows in. Hell, you can make it rated R, get a lot of blood in there, it'd be a lot of fun. But then it turns out that Morbius isn't the one doing all the killing. It's his love interest who begged Morbius to make her a vampire so that they could be together forever. And after a lot of persuasion, Morbius finally agrees to turn her into a vampire. But she can't handle her thirst for blood and ends up killing a lot of people. So we're now sympathizing with the Morbius character because the love of his life is committing all these heinous murders, but she really can't help it. And then we could learn that she's fallen in with a bad crowd of vampires who are very pro-eat humans. So then we can see Morbius and Kraven
Team up.
to kill the bad vampires and try to save Morbius's wife. And then that movie could end with her like begging Morbius to kill her because she can't control herself and doesn't want to hurt any more people. And it's tragically poetic because the whole reason she wanted to be a vampire was so that she could live forever with the love of her life. And now she's having to beg him to kill her.
Wow, that actually sounds good. It's a story with stakes.
So now we've laid the groundwork for Venom, Kraven, and Morbius. Kraven can be this badass new character that people care about because he's layered and shows compassion, but he also slaughtered some vampires with his giant crossbow, so he's cool. So where Kraven's Last Hunt comes in is in the Venom sequel. You can call it Venom 2 Enter the Hunter or something like that. This movie would feature Kraven not as the villain, but just as the antagonist who is pursuing Venom for alleged murders. And we could even get a tease at the end of the First Hunt movie with Morbius, where we see Kraven tease that he's going to San Francisco because there's like some brutal mass murders happening and it doesn't appear to be a human that's doing them. And then in Venom 2, we could see Venom put in a position where he's being framed for these killings. We'd see all these news reports about Venom killing innocent people in a really brutal and bloody fashion.
Like a turd in the wind.
And then Eddie Brock, who, keep in mind, is an investigative journalist, we could see him investigating the murders, trying to clear Venom's name and capture whoever or whatever is doing all the killing. Now, Kraven would be convinced that the killer is Venom. Meanwhile, Eddie does some research into Kraven's history, where we then learn about his checkered past, as well as his father's criminal empire. Eddie would then become convinced that it is Kraven who is responsible for the murders, and is framing Venom so that he can get the city to, fund and support his hunt for this extraterrestrial trophy. Kraven and Venom would then be pinned against each other, they'd have their big second act fight, but they would then soon realize that they're both hunting the wrong culprit. It's then revealed in the third act that the big bad committing all of these murders is indeed a symbiote, but it's not Eddie Brock and Venom, it's Cletus Cassidy as Carnage.
Let there be carnage.
Venom and Kraven would then
Team up.
to take on Carnage. We would then see a massive battle with Venom and Kraven fighting Carnage. Carnage would then escape, and the movie ends with Venom and Kraven deciding that they are going to continue their partnership and go to find Carnage and put a stop to him before he can kill anyone else. And then we hear Kraven say that he knows a guy that could help out. Enter Morbius.
Intriguing.
This could then set up an ultimate Carnage movie where we could see Venom, Kraven, and Morbius and have a massive showdown with Carnage, and hell, bring in the vampires and get like a demonic entity involved, make Carnage this really big and powerful threat that requires Venom's bulk, Kraven's skill, and Morbius's magic to be defeated. That's 4 films right there, interconnected storytelling and characters that an audience could actually get behind and care about, instead of all these vague teases about team-ups that never happen and empty references to Spider-Man. And then, if they wanted to join in on this multiverse fad, fine. Bring in Madam Web as your Doctor Strange type character and send Venom, Morbius, and Kraven on a multiversal adventure. But you don't have to call her Madam Web. Madam Web implies a direct connection to the Web of Life and Destiny and, of course, Spider-Man. So call her like Madam Time or something. Just change the name a little bit and have her be this overseer of the multiversal hive mind that we heard Venom mention in Let There Be Carnage.
80 billion light years of hive knowledge across universes would explode your tiny little brain.
Have her suit actually be a symbiote, once again placing Venom and the symbiote lore at the center of this universe. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again, Venom is the only character Sony has that can replace Spider-Man.
But other person, if Sony has Spider-Man, why do they need to replace him? He is their biggest draw.
Well, because they've got Spider-Man over in the MCU, so they either need to ignore Spider-Man in their universe and fill that void with Venom, or they can embrace Spider-Man and then work more closely with Marvel Studios on all of their Spider-Man adjacent projects. Because look, the current way that they're doing things just isn't working. They give these vague, meaningless mentions of Spider-Man here or there, and then every few years there's this new sharing dispute over the character. It's exhausting. It also makes it to where Spider-Man can't really rise to his fullest potential over in the MCU because there's so many rules about where he can and can't be used or even mentioned. I'm very happy with Tom Holland's Spider-Man being in the MCU, and I don't want to see that change. I want to see him team up with Daredevil and fight the Kingpin. I want to see him meet the Fantastic Four and go toe-to-toe with Doctor Doom. And yeah, in an ideal world, Sony would just let Marvel Studios have creative input on not only Spider-Man, but all of their live-action Spider-Man adjacent stuff, such as Venom. And then they could actually bring us a film like Spider-Man vs. Venom, instead of just giving us an empty tease for it that never happens. But asking 2 major studios owned by 2 major companies to work together, it isn't an easy ask. So to summarize my complicated position, I don't want Tom Holland's Spider-Man going anywhere. I want him to remain in the MCU as Spider-Man for years to come. And if that therefore means we have to have a Spider-Man-less live-action Spider-Verse over at Sony, so be it. That's why I gave my suggestion of how they could do it without Spider-Man. Or if Sony and Marvel want to work more closely together and interconnect their stories and movies by working closely with Kevin Feige, that's great too. But what I don't want is this vague suggestion of a connection that doesn't even exist, and the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. That's what they're doing right now, and it's just messy, and you don't get the payoff from either side. You don't get to see Spider-Man over in the Sony stuff, and you don't get to see Spider-Man reach his fullest potential in the MCU. They're just pulling back and forth, and neither is getting to be as great as it could be. Now, of course, another option is that they could have their cake and eat it too by having Spider-Man in the MCU and in the Sonyverse while still keeping the 2 universes separate, the multiverse.
What, like having Tom Holland's Spider-Man travel between universes?
Well, I mean, I guess that's an option, but I had something better in mind. Bring back Andrew Garfield.
I am Spider-Man. In my world.
Andrew was the best part of Spider-Man No Way Home, and fans have been clamoring for his Spider-Man to return again. Sony wouldn't have to go through the trouble of introducing another Spider-Man into their Sonyverse and getting confused with, oh, well, I thought Tom Holland was Spider-Man now. They could just bring in an already established Spider-Man, and after No Way Home, audiences would understand that the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man is just that other Spider-Man from that other universe. Now, granted, bringing Andrew Garfield back into the Sonyverse alongside the Sinister Six would just be retreading old ground, the same old ground that derailed his time as Peter Parker to begin with. But if Sony does bring in another live-action Spider-Man, Andrew would be my pick. And of course, I could never say no to giving Tobey and Sam Raimi another shot at Spider-Man 4. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think is the best path forward for Sony's Spider-Verse. Should they stick to what they're good at and focus on the animated stuff and leave the live action to Marvel? Or should they continue their failed attempts at a Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse? Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments below, or you can at me on Twitter. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, click that bell so you get alerted every time we upload a new video. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.